everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm going to do that again. Oh, man. I really could not remember.
That was like a weird pause.
Sorry. Here you go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, it's me, Jackie. I'm no longer the regular host because Rob's back. Hooray!
And it's me, Diana. Hello.
Woo, everybody. We are coming around the home stretch on this podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss it at length. But we're doing two things slightly different in that since it is the month, if you're listening to this right when it comes out, it is September. We are doing only episodes on the topic of supervision, and double weird to wrap up our summer of book clubs. We are doing a everybody gets it at the same time special supervision book club to round out our Supervision September, which means you listen to every single September episode, you will have all the Supervision CEs that you are required to have for recertification. Will you have all the Supervision CEs you need to actually be good at supervision? That is a question only you, the listener, can answer.
It's a journey.
It's a journey,
it's
but
a process.
You got 4. So, that's you hit a minimum threshold. So congratulations, everybody. You did it. Now, fortunately, I'm not 100% sure what order this is going to come in, but I was sick and I missed my first episode in like a bazillion episodes. So I'm back for today. But sadly, book club guy Alan Haberman is not able to join us on this recording due to some last minute scheduling kerfuffles. So we'll have Alan back this winter for our winter book club, which will come out only for patrons and then come out for everyone else a year in the future. So we will be hearing some more Alan, but unfortunately not today. But I'm back, and my voice does not sound as garbage as it would have when we were going to record our last episode. So hooray for that.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back. It's no longer Girl Tribe.
No, was that what you called the show that episode?
It was Girl Squad.
Girl Tribe. Oh, yeah, Girl Squad.
Girl Squad. Okay. No, this is a Supervision Squad, and we're going to be talking about a supervision book that I've been interested in for a while. I think it was like probably Dr. John Austin, maybe in his newsletter, or it might have been some other talk. But we are going to be reading, we'll be discussing Discipline Without Punishment by Dick Grote, who is a consultant. Now, this is not a book that is directly a behavior analytics, certainly, though it talks very much about concepts like reinforcement. Does it use the term punishment correctly? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it does cover a topic in supervision that I think we pretty much always leave out, which is what do you do when somebody just continues to make mistakes somehow or do the wrong thing at work? So we're going to be talking about this because I think most of our episodes, and rightly so, are on the idea of how do we more precisely label what it is we're supposed to do at our work? How do we appropriately train our employees? How do we set up meaningful consequences to maintain the behaviors of note in the workplace? And Dick Grote also recommends these are things that you have to be doing as well. So nothing else is going to work if you don't have those pieces in place. But I think everybody, because I know I listen to those episodes that we make, and I'm always left saying, yeah, but what do you do even with all the training and all of the precision in expectations? What do you do when you still have employees who just can't seem to get to work on time or who just refuse seemingly to use the tools that you are laying out for them to do their job properly? And I think this book is one of the few I see that hits on exactly what you could do in that situation. Possibly not always should do, but you definitely could do. And I think we'll have a good conversation about some of the pros and cons of this approach. But man, it is just nice to know what do you do? Because I don't think I've met a single supervisor who doesn't say, yeah, I did the behavior skills training. I did all the good like job crafting. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. I do all my meaningful supervision check-ins. And yet no one does what they're supposed to do. The second I leave, everyone's just doing whatever they want to do. And I don't know, I'm at a loss. And I think at some point, and one thing I think this book does that I really like is it does put the responsibility of actually doing one's job on the employee. Not that it is 100% an employee's job to always be doing everything properly, because there, as we all know as behavior analysts, there are a lot of contingencies in place that might make someone who could be doing a good job not do a good job in ways that we might all say, yeah, it makes sense you're doing a bad job. Your boss is a jerk, or no one is training you to do that, or they're expecting you to do 50 jobs to save money so that they can get their golden parachute vacation and you can just eat a bag of rocks because, BS rolls downhill at a lot of job sites. So there are a lot of reasons that I think employees should not be doing the right thing because their job, well, they should always be doing the right thing, but, aren't doing the right thing that are in some ways justified. But at some point, we do all have to ask ourselves, why am I doing my job correctly or not? And it goes beyond just because no one taught me how to do the job, because all of us have had those days where we know exactly what to do and we still choose not to do it. And there's a level of responsibility that this book does lay at the feet of employees, which sometimes is needed. And I think it's needed that managers hear that, as well as hearing all the other things that go into, well, why might your employees be engaging in inappropriate or not correct behaviors for other reasons. So we're going to talk about all of that, especially in this book. And it's not that long a book. I mean, it's longer than some of our recent books, but it is not that in-depth a book. I think it gives a lot of good, you're a manager, here's some information, facts. So overall, I enjoyed this as something new to put into our supervision bag. Jackie, Diana, what did you think?
I both liked and disliked this book.
Mm-hmm. You said you would. I think this was a book we almost did last year, and you said very clearly, I absolutely do not want to read this book. It looks super boring and managey, and I hate it.
And so I did not think it was super boring. So I will give it credit. I didn't find it I liked their real life examples, like the Frito-Lay company. Is it me? No, it's not me. So I did not find it boring. So I'm going to retract my statement there. I didn't find it boring. I don't like the title. I think it is, I understand why he made that title for layman's terms, but I don't think it's accurate. And I think that it misses a big piece of problem behavior, right? Decreasing just general problem behavior. So that part I don't really love. And, while reading it, I found that some of the suggestions may be too simplistic. So, right, he was just like, well, just do this and everything will be fine. And I don't think it's that easy in being a supervisor and trying to do things of this nature. I don't think it, he just is like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so easy for you. And I don't think it's going to be easy, right? I think he misses out right. I do love that it's your responsibility, right? I think that's great. I love that piece and we'll get there. But I think he misses the point of having a conversation with the employee. I just didn't feel that. It didn't feel empathetic. It felt like I am your manager and you are my employee and whatever I say goes. And that's what you need to do. And I didn't feel like he did a great job of building collaboration or building that. But, I think maybe we could talk about where personally, if I was going to do a third edition of this book, because we read the second edition, where I would add parts of that in the step process. But overall, I don't actually think it was a horrible book. I actually liked it more than I thought I would, but still not in my top 5.
Of all supervision books, or your top 5? Okay. Yeah,
not
I don't know
all
if
books in general, right? Because I can say I was reading
Anne of Green Gables,
right?
Pride and Prejudice, and Discipline Without Punishment.
And Discipline Without Punishment, number 3. No, but I can say
squeaks into the top 3
that I had been reading a fiction book at the same time. And I went on vacation, so I was camping, and I had Discipline Without Punishment, and I had this fiction book that is going to be nameless. And I actually was like, which one should I read? And I actually chose Discipline Without Punishment because I didn't like the fiction book I was reading.
Wow.
And you like a lot of books.
I do, and I just could not get into that fiction book. So, I mean, it was better than that fiction book by a very a great author, because I love all of their other stuff, but...
I know. I'm interested to go read that book now to see how I feel about it.
I gave it back to Diana and
she threw it at me. No, just kidding.
I don't want this anymore.
So Diana, we mentioned the name of the book in the episode title, but why don't you give the book its bona fides, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book.
Sure. So the full title is Discipline Without Punishment, the proven strategy that turns problem employees into superior performers. Second edition by Dick Grote, published by Amacom, which when I saw it in there, I thought it was a misspelling of Amazon, but it's not.
It's not a self-published Amazon pamphlet, no.
And it's from 2006. I think I forgot to say that as well. So, I mean, publishing a third edition might be a welcome change, because a lot has changed in this world since 2006. 2006 is graduating from high school this year.
Yeah,
so
even if you just looked at the difference in how some of the rules and the whys, because Dick Grote does talk a lot about the whys, being able to explain to your employees the why of certain behaviors at work, just talking about that in the land of sort of the hybrid work communities or the remote work communities that people are now in, would be interesting. I think would be interesting. I like his perspective on that. He's been doing management stuff for a long time. But what were your thoughts, Diana? You were excited, not excited to start this book, and kind of your general feelings on it.
I was not excited to start this book. I also find the title really off-putting. Mm-hmm. And, we've referenced this before when we talked about behavior analytic language. We talked about the Bolevicic article in which they discuss valence of language that we use in our field and how we should, perhaps be careful in choosing negatively veiled words. And they're two of the three, or arguably three of the three words in this title, to me, have a negative valence to them. Discipline and punishment. And then the other word is without. So that's not that super great either. So just the title is not appealing to me. I do think that this book focuses on only a one small sliver of supervisory practice. And so what I don't want to do is I really want to talk about what's not in this book, because I think that there are tons of important supervisory practices that he does not touch on here. But for what the book is doing, it's focused really specifically on what is the discipline. What is the discipline system that is in place at your agency, and how are you going to ensure that it's followed effectively such that everyone's getting a fair shake, right? And it's clear to everyone what the process is when you do have to go through all the steps from reminders all the way up through termination of an employee. And like you said, Rob, not a lot of our literature in our field, and even at this point, we've read several of these different types of supervision books, and not a lot of them have really focused on that side of things. Mm-hmm. It's very much, here's all the proactive strategies that you want to do so you don't encounter these problems. And I'm huge on the proactive side. I think that is absolutely where you want to spend your time and energies. But it would be naive to think that you never also need to address this side of things and have a plan in place when reaction does need to occur and you have, continued challenges with an employee. So that being said, in that one area, I think this is a great addition, and it does give me more of a scaffold in which to think about what should a disciplinary system look like? Are there ways in which I would like to add even to that particular sliver? Yeah, there are. So I'm left feeling like an update might be good. This definitely helped me think more in this area. And it's useful, but there's more that I still want to kind of gather.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly, I think even going to something like the title, there is nothing inherently, if you are thinking I have to have some way of having some sort of, consequential system for problem employees at my workplace, but I don't want it to be punishment. This book will not give you that, because I think, as we talked about a little bit already, when you are telling an employee, here are the things you need to do, and here is what will happen next, and there is the sense of you will be asked to decide you don't want to work here anymore. While that is a nicer way to go about a punishment system, it is still a punishment system. So this book does not...
It's a disciplinary system.
It's a disciplinary system, yes.
Right?
Will it punish the behavior of the employee? the system.
We don't know. And he
We
didn't
don't
talk
know.
about that because he's really not using punishment in the way that we might.
No, he does use reinforcement
He does.
correctly.
Yeah.
In the chapter on reinforcement. But I think with punishment, really, don't go into this thinking, oh, I don't ever want to use punishment at all, and this book will teach me how to do it. I think it is more how do you set up fair systems that are consistent and somewhat conceptually systematic with a goal of treating your employees with respect and ensuring that they're able to do their job perfectly, such that the only reason they wouldn't do their job perfectly are for reasons that have nothing to do with you as a boss or your company as a company. It's totally outside kind of stimuli that are impacting a person's behavior, and you are not required to control every aspect of a person's life. And sometimes, much like in the no-fault divorce metaphor that comes up, sometimes it just isn't going to work out. The job is not going to be the right match for the employee. And it's not a matter of they're bad and shouldn't work at your great company so much as our company believes this employee disagrees, and they'll find another job because they're good, just not the right match for this job, which is nice. I wouldn't call it discipline without punishment so much as like consistent and fair discipline with minimal amounts of coercion and punishment as much as humanly possible. But I understand why that's a bad title.
He's using punishment as coercion. Yeah.
I think he's also using it for cruelty. Discipline without being a total ass is kind of because a lot of managers, I think, when they think of discipline, and we'll talk about it in the book, really think of it as this is the system I have to use to get rid of this jerk that I don't want working here anymore, which inherently just leads to nobody is happy, everyone is miserable, morale is low, and it's not teaching anyone what they're supposed to be doing. It's not making other employees feel like they have less work to do because the people who are causing problems at work are, being either supported or being removed. It just leaves everyone feeling miserable and mean all the time, which again is a very long title that wouldn't fit on the cover. So who is Dick Grote? Well, he is a consultant and a manager.
I just thought you were going to say a man.
He is a man. Who is this man? Dick Grote, of course. He worked for a lot of big companies. He got his training start with General Electric, who I believe General Electric is one of those businesses that has like the big business management, so like Six Sigma, or one of those sort of management houses that sort of set up all those really good training procedures for really good managers back in like the 60s and the 70s. But he sort of made his bones as a management development person at Frito-Lay, the company that makes such great things as chips, Doritos, and stuff. Pepsi? They own Pepsi, I think.
I don't know. They gotta get Doritos, red Doritos, blue Doritos, purple Doritos.
Cool American Doritos.
Fritos.
Right.
Yep.
And definitely Fritos.
And definitely Fritos, because that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And Lay's chips. Lay's potato chips.
I know. I was going to say that too.
Okay.
Do you know what?
The yellow bag are the best. I really just want to talk about chips. Yes.
Okay.
Jackie.
But the funny thing is everybody calls it the yellow bag. Like nobody knows that it's called Lay's potato chips. Like it's my child's favorite chip, Lay's, the Lay's potato chip.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, I wish that I could get that yellow bag of chips. And then her friend's like, right? I love that yellow bag of chips. And everybody knew what they were talking about. Nobody knew the name. So that was
That's
pretty
right.
funny.
Yellow bag is the best. Yeah.
Yellow bag is the best.
Wow. So Dick's story seems to mainly, or at least the story he tells, really comes from his work at Frito-Lay in the early 70s, where he was brought in to help out with some morale problems that one of the Texas Frito-Lay plants were having. Would anyone like to share what those morale problems were leading to? What was the inciting incident where they're like, Dick, you got to come in. Our plant is doing awful. Here's the latest big problem we're having. Jackie, what was the latest big problem they were having at this
made
plant?
me so happy, actually. And maybe one of the reasons why I did not hate the book is because the Frito-Lay company was having a hard time because somebody was coming and writing obscene messages on the chip only in specific Frito-Lay companies, and then it was putting in the bag so people would be eating their chips and find this obscene message on their chips in the bag.
Yeah. Written on the chip with a Sharpie marker.
Chip. That is so you can't even eat it because it's Sharpie marker. But so that means, by the way, whoever did it, greatest idea ever, right? if you really want to stick it to your job and you like hate your job so much that you are willing to like get everyone involved, right? Because that's what they said. It had to be a whole thing because they had to stop production. They had to write it down. They had to pop it back on. Like it wasn't like easy. And then they had to figure out how it was happening, and everybody hated their job, and everybody, like the company's profits were tanking because nobody wanted to eat those chips that had the obscene, I wish I knew what they were. They didn't say, I don't remember.
No, he didn't say. I mean, it's only a potato chip, so it can't be very big. So I would assume it is some 4-letter word. And he didn't say it was a picture. So
no, he said
a picture would also be quite effective.
Yeah, right. It's just I was just going to say something like lewd, but anything lewd, anything in your mind.
Use your imagination, listeners. So all we know is it was some word.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's where he came up with the idea of discipline without punishment, which, you know what a great opportunity. If anyone ever is like, I want to try something out like really crazy and potentially paradigm defining, I guess it's when you've been called in for like the worst employment situation in the world. Because couldn't get much worse than the employees are actively sabotaging the product that they are creating because they hate their job so much. Like, what can you do Can you do anything worse? Like, and pull a weapon? No. I mean, it can't get any worse than that. Just like coming up with an ineffective management, because that's all they had. And so from there, he's gone on to do all sorts of consulting for all sorts of big Fortune 500 companies. And I saw he worked at, he consulted to Lucasfilm at one point, and SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild Union. So he's been doing consulting forever. And then he wrote down this book and describes the
came to him in a dream.
No, I don't think it was a dream. I think he, well, you know what? Why don't we get into it? We'll get in, because that's how the book actually starts. So the book itself is broken
down
sequence into the dream sequence. It's sort of a dream ballet where Dick Grote dances the discipline without punishment. So the book is broken down into kind of like 3 big sections. The first one being sort of what should you be doing to support your employees? And then sort of what do you do when you've done everything and there are still problems with the employees? And that's the discipline without punishment section itself, which I love this. If you are writing a book and you want to talk about performance improvement and discipline systems, and you say, but what if they're the same except for a little bit of paperwork differences? Thank you so much, because you've saved me a lot of reading time. Because, he didn't do the thing that I think a lot of those books do, where they're like, and then I wrote a chapter where I described a thing. And then I wrote a whole nother section that was the exact same section with a couple new pieces on it because it was slightly different. Yeah. What if you just said, these things are kind of interchangeable except for a few factors, and then I'll tell you what those factors are in part 2 versus part 3, and then you'll know how to do all of it. And then the last part goes into sort of some general logistics, which, again, we're not going to spend as much time on because, again, for our listeners, you may not be the boss of HR or in charge, the CEO of your company. And as we'll talk about, while these things I think are some neat ideas, you're not going to be able to implement like a full discipline without punishment system unless you are in control or part of the team that is in control of what is the discipline discipline system at your place of employment. Like, you can't just do it unilaterally. You do some of it unilaterally, but not all of it.
And I think that I hated the book. I hated the book less than I thought I would because of this chapter. Mm-hmm. Right? I was thinking that going into reading the first chapter, I'm like, oh, he's going to tell me how amazing this is, and then he's going to give me hinters, and then I'm just going to read the same thing over and over again. About how great this is, but nothing new. And I think he did a great job of giving us new information in each chapter.
Yeah. And then when it was repetitive in a way that was helpful to sort of, solidify some of the ideas, rather than because I have to tell you every single thing about this really awesome thing I made, which some authors do that. And it is really, really boring to read.
You could summarize the outline of this book on a cocktail napkin.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Yep. 100%. Yeah.
And this definitely was a book where I read chapter 1, and at the end I said, man, I think I got it. I think I got the whole book. Do I need to read any more of it? And to be honest, if I had not read any more of it, I probably still could talk intelligently about discipline without punishment for like 20, 30 minutes, which is nice. But this podcast is a little longer than that, nor would it be fair to our listeners. But if you're like, I just need to know what this is so I can tell someone to see if they like the idea, like your big boss, you could read chapter 1 and you probably have enough to share with somebody else who would have the decision-making power to say, that does sound good, that does not sound good. And then you could read the rest of the book to get the actual, details. So
But there are no more fun Frito-Lay anecdotes.
no,
No,
the first one,
just
the
that
chapter
one.
one is it.
I was looking forward to some like really groovy stuff, man.
There's some little stories and some little little play acted parts in the
A
book.
lot of play acting.
which I do like that. Like, what is this?
Do you know
gonna
what it
look
reminded me of?
What?
You know. Positive parenting.
Oh yes, it definitely has a positive parenting vibe.
Gee, shucks, Dad.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way before.
Oh boy, Mr. Grote, I sure am going to try harder at my job at the plant. Thanks for setting me on the straight and narrow.
That's episode 67 and 68 if anyone wants to go back and listen to that.
It is
I don't do
great book.
pairings and book clubs. I'll just scatter them throughout.
So let's, we've kind of talked about our thoughts on the book. Let's start going through the book. So chapter 1, we kind of already started talking about it. The birth of discipline without punishment. So again, Dick is asked to, hey, people are writing swears and obscene words on the chips. What do you got? And he lays out, I think, a really good picture of what management at this company was like at the time. And probably what a lot of management hopefully is not still like everywhere, but I think we've probably all worked in places like this at various points in our careers, whether it was before we got into behavior analysis or whether we have older teens who are going into their first jobs and they're like, why is my manager such a jerk? And, the sort of traditional punishment systems, the traditional discipline methods, which are progressive discipline methods. So this plant at the time used traditional progressive discipline, which, as a quote from page 5, the purpose is to correct behavior through progressively more severe penalties. 1, an employee who has committed an infraction is verbally warned and told that if the same infraction occurs again within some specified period, the degree of disciplinary action will be increased. 2, if the employee again commits the same or a similar violation, the employee will be given a written warning. 3, if the employee again transgresses in the same manner and within the specified period, he or she will be suspended from employment for a specified period of time without pay. 4, if the employee again violates the same rule within the specified time, the employee will be discharged. End quote. So
Shot out of a cannon.
So basically, you mess up and you get told you're in trouble. Don't do it again. Then you mess up again. You said, hey, stop doing that. And then you mess up again. And at some point in this this pattern of making mistakes or possibly just frustrating your boss, at some point you are told, all right, now you're really in trouble. Now you're not going to get paid and we're going to send you home and you can't work for a while, which usually results in what Dick Grote was seeing, which is people come back to work. They say, sure, whatever, I'll do a better job. But they're not going to because they're angry. And their bosses are angry at them. And everyone is just angry, which makes nobody do a better job. And eventually, enough evidence is gathered to beg the person in charge to finally fire the person who is not doing their best work. And nobody's happy about it. And it takes forever. And it's a lot of resources. And everyone is an angrier, sadder person for the process. And
by the way, I would love someone to give me disciplinary where I go home for 2 days, to be honest.
Well, usually just one day.
Yeah, but I would take 2 days.
I don't think it's a negotiation of how many days
like,
you get.
You
get
go
one
home
day.
and I'd be like, sure, absolutely, I can go home. And if you want to give me one extra day to really think about what I've done,
it doesn't sound fun. It doesn't sound fun. And according to Dick Grote, says everyone hates. I mean, everyone likes it in the sense of they think it's fair, but nobody is happy that it happens. Or
he says, don't worry about people viewing it as a reward because really people are usually very upset and
being anxious, right?
Yeah, they don't want it to.
So basically, he said, this doesn't seem to be working where we just keep getting angrier and angrier at our employees and telling them to stop being bad over and over and over until at some point we're like, fine, now you're fired. And he said, what if we changed it?
Progressive, but it's not progressive because it's like a backward system. Yeah. It's progressive in the sense that the level of trouble that you're in increases.
Yeah.
But both of them do that. So.
Well, it's sort of like when we talk about if you're going, if one were to use punishment, what's the worst way to do it? We'll start with a really minor punisher and then very slowly over time increase the intensity of the punisher, because we all know what happens is everyone attenuates to the punishment. It has no meaning anymore. And now you're just being an ass instead of actually utilizing behavioral principles in any means of effectiveness. Again, that's not a debate about whether we should or should not use punishment. If one were to use punishment in a way that could result in behavior change, that's a terrible way to do it. It's just slowly change the intensity of the punisher over time, and potentially for reasons that are not well defined. He does go into why do we even have this system, which I appreciate as sort of a history that the system that the progressive discipline system was a union request, but not because the union said we'd really like to be punished slowly over a period of time with increasing intensity. It was more that bosses would just fire people because they felt like it, and they wanted some system in place to support workers' rights, so that you can't just be fired for whatever reason at any time.
So accountability.
Yeah.
In the system.
However, in general, Dick Grote points out that most people he's known who uses systems really hate them, in that it's just a lot of how do I build a case to get someone fired. So it's not really progressive discipline so much as how can I ineffectually fire someone over a long, excruciating period of time. And in the meantime, no one's doing their best work. And everyone is being punished, not just the person who is on the progressive discipline system.
And it's creating a culture in which no one feels supported.
They write swear words on the
worried
chips.
about, the boss looking over your shoulder. You never know when the other shoe is going to drop. Like, many people have received these types of disciplinary measures. So everyone just feels overall defeated. You don't want to do more. So like all the other, bazillion episodes that we've had on supervision are talking about how to improve that side of the culture. But this may be one of the reasons why those, less preferred cultures get established.
Yeah. And I did find this part a little strange in that he doesn't quite make a case as to why his system, the discipline without punishment, is inherently better than the progressive discipline system, because he does mention a number of things progressive discipline systems tend to not do well. However, I did not tell it, not being, someone with like Six Sigma management training, whether those systems fail because they are meant to fail in the ways we sort of think of kind of, more appropriate and humane discipline systems, or whether they fail for the same reasons that discipline without punishment would fail if you were not using some of the systems and the supports and you weren't thinking about human behavior and you were just using it on its face. Like, well, these are the steps I must go through to get rid of you, right? Like, I could see you using discipline without punishment, and if you don't understand human behavior and you haven't done all the legwork to sort of understand, are the consequences in place to actually reinforce employee appropriate work behavior, this system's going to fail just as badly, and it might not look that different. So that part I wasn't 100% sure on in terms of like the history of management systems, because again, Dick Grote brings up progressive discipline systems that exist in a lot of places, and that really the goal is just how am I going to punish someone's bad behavior so they don't do it anymore, which we know is a really meaningless way to reinforce appropriate work behaviors. And it really takes out a lot of the kind of decency that would go into how we treat our employees. We're looking at them as problems that need to be solved rather than humans who can do great work and there's some reason that they are not. And it's not up to us to investigate all of the reasons, just the ones related to being at work. And even then, that might still result in individuals not engaging in the best work behaviors that we need them to as managers or supervisors. But then some of the other problems he brings up are people often use disciplinary systems inconsistently. It's not clear who gets punished how, which again, I don't see why you couldn't just make a better, he talks about the tiered systems in discipline without punishment, why you couldn't do that with the traditional system. Again, I'm not saying you should use the traditional system. That's more of a question. I could still see someone hesitating to use discipline without punishment ineffectually to the point that it is ineffectual, the same as you would with progressive disciplinary. There's less chance for attenuation to the punishment in discipline without punishment. So that part, I definitely do see how that is very different. And how it really tries to remove sort of discipline as a punisher, as a delivered punisher. Because he does bring up that whenever you use any sort of punishment procedure, you're going to get a lot of side effects. And all you're going to do is at best, stop a behavior from occurring. You're not actually going to then result in increased appropriate work behaviors. And I do also see kind of traditional discipline systems as he does, as not really demanding much of employees. It's sort of this expectation of like, could you please just not be terrible? And I think a lot of our systems that we put in place for our employees, we really do. When you think about them, a lot of them are set up just to be like, could you please just not be awful? Rather than actually expecting our employees to do really, really good work. And not in a sort of, I really hate movies. I've increasingly hated them. I think the more supervision episodes we do, where there's like a boss who comes in, and usually they're meant to be like a bad boss because they're sort of like villain. And they come in and the second in command is like, we weren't able to catch the hero to stop their whatever they were doing, it's some sort of espionage movie. And all the boss does is come in and say, you've got till the end of the day to find James Bond or I'll kill you all. And it's really hard for me to watch movies like that anymore because I'm like, that guy's a bad boss. He's not really helping his employees
and a bad actor
do a better job of catching spies and killing them. Like that. Like, if you can't do it yourself, Mr. Boss, how are you yelling at everyone? Like, you're not going to motivate everyone now. This is terrible. So, I do think a lot of systems sort of set up that like all your employees are stupid, and thank God you're here to yell at them until they do their job. Whereas we should never be treating our employees as if they're stupid. They, for whatever reason, are not doing the job they need to do. And there are a lot of reasons that could be. And as long as we're not blaming anyone until we've done an investigation, we are respecting ourselves, you're respecting them. And we are maintaining open lines of communication. So discipline without punishment, it's not as much a focus of the book, but starts there, is do we have enough positive contacts with our employees? Because almost everyone is doing a good job at some time. No, very few people are just, this person is bad at their job and they never are anything but bad at their job. Most people make mistakes or do something wrong occasionally or are allowed to do something that they shouldn't be doing, and it's somehow reinforced within the context of the job, in which case it's the job's fault, not the person's fault. And it's important that we focus most of our management time on that. And we have 1 million supervision episodes in which we do that. This book does not go into a lot of them,
1 million.
So we won't talk about them that much. Yeah, it's 1 million, 1.5 million.
This is episode 1,000,001.
Yeah. But what do you do when the change is not occurring, even when everything else is in place? You are spending all your time on training. You are spending all your time on positive feedback. All right. What happens then? How do you change employee behavior then? And also, if firing the person is your answer, you failed. So as a manager, you need to come in knowing there's a lot that you can do to support your employees that has to be done for any of this to work. And if you fire your employee, your system failed. And when you have those two parts of the kind of gamut of responses kind of solidly in place, then you can focus on, okay, what are the steps that I could do to keep my employees doing the things they need to do without just these old systems of punishment over and over and over again.
One thing I liked about this chapter is that they highlighted that most of the time, which I totally agree with, most of the time the people that are just doing their job and doing a great job don't get any sort of feedback from their employee. They're just like, oh, they're doing great. They don't need anything. But those are the people that we should be providing reinforcement to, right?
Yeah.
And so I
talk about the, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say he called it the weeds, the roses, and the daisies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the weeds are the problem employees that you're spending a lot of time with. The roses are the people who really excel without a lot of support. But most people are neither of those two, and they're not going to be either of those two. So they're the main part of your field. They're the daisies, and they should also be getting attention to flourish.
Yep.
Sorry, Jackie, what were you going to say?
That.
Sorry.
Some other things that he added when he was putting this system together was the idea of the kind of progressive reminders, sort of the steps that one takes, that none of them are set in stone. If you get a sort of an initial reminder 1 or reminder 2, he doesn't come up with any fancy terms, which I guess I appreciate. It's just reminder 1, reminder 2, leave with pay, and then you would be terminated if you continue to make mistakes at your job or do whatever you're doing at your job. But with all the steps, except for the one where you're fired, there is a period of time whereas if you say, you know what? Okay, figured it out, know how to do the job. It's all on me. I'm not going to ever be late or rude or smoke next to, noxious fumes, whatever it is that you're doing.
He had a lot of concerns about smoking in the cafeteria.
It happened. I mean, he's from the 70s. I'm sure that was a common problem then.
Yes.
But if you go a period of time where you're, back to your typical appropriate levels of service, then your reminders and your suspension all goes to like a dead file, so it's no longer held against you. So you do get a reward of, if you can fix the problem, it does go away. Like, it's not held over your head for the rest of time. And of course, the suspension with pay, which is sort of the final step in discipline without punishment, with the idea of, I don't want people just being sent home and then they're sitting there going, well, not only do I hate my job, but now I can't put food on the table, because a lot of people he was working with in factories are living paycheck to paycheck. So losing that day's pay could result in their not being able to afford something that they need as a family, which is just one more way they're, the people are now upset. They're feeling frustrated. And even if they come back to work, if they say, fine, I'll do a good job, they're not saying it because they're like, you know what, thought about it and I want to do this job and I will do the thing I need to do. They're just doing it because they know you hold all the power, which is not the same thing. Technically, you can get fired in both systems, but in one of them, it does definitely show, like, I'm sending you home and I'm going to pay you because I do want you to think about whether this is the job for you. I'm not sending you home without pay because, like, you better stop, or it'll be even worse than this, which is going to just breed resentment. And from that, it was a big success right off the bat. The terminations dropped. Again, he'll say terminations are not the best metric of whether your discipline system is good or not, but it did start seeing improvement in morale, saw more recognition of good performance. People stopped writing swear words on the chips. And it was popular enough that other Frito-Lay plants that didn't have swear chip problems actually started using discipline without punishment. And so that's the story of discipline without punishment. But let's get into part 1, building superior performance, to start talking about what do we need to do a discipline without punishment system. So the first chapter is on recognizing good performance. Again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it because it really does describe the principles of reinforcement. It describes them very well. I think for a management book, this is one of the better ones in terms of really understanding how reinforcement works, how reinforcement can maintain behavior, and comes up with some really great examples of reinforcement in the workplace. My favorite being when everyone, except for a couple of people, show up on time for a meeting, and then the person who runs the meeting say, well, let's give everyone a few more minutes to get here. Diana hates that I'm late to almost everything. Here's a reason I'm late to almost everything. Has anyone actually been late to anything and the meeting's already started and they get nasty looks and they get yelled at for being late to the meeting? I haven't. Every time I show up in a meeting, the meeting hasn't even started, even though I'm 10 to 15 minutes late, because everyone was waiting for me and a couple other people. So as far as I am concerned, the lesson I've learned is I'm the most important person at the meeting and they won't start until I get there. So if you're mad at me, hey, not my fault. If I come to a meeting,
that's not why I'm late. I'm late just because I don't have my life together. So,
well, whatever the reason, if you're late and the meeting hasn't started, why would you bother getting your life? Like, that's not one more incentive to get your life together. The meeting is irrelevant at that point. So we've got lots of little
going down the trash. Is that why?
And then he also does, and I think a really good book, Bringing Out the Best in People by Aubrey Daniels, does a much more robust job of this. But he really talks about all the ways that you can reinforce your employees. Like, what can you do to deliver recognition? You can just give them better tasks to do at work. You can do things like, this was kind of funny, but I suppose if you work in an industry that values information, you can be like, listen, you've been doing such an amazing job with sales. I'm going to give you the new product brochure to read over the weekend, which sounds like a punishment to me. But, for some of your salesmen, they might think that's really cool, or it shows that you trust them. You could just introduce them as visitors or touring and say, Bob, like, you're a great, or Susie, you're amazing. Could you show our guest around the floor or tell them about your job? You do such a great job of it. Little things like that, which you can just do while you're doing your daily jobs. You can send memos that are nice. You can buy coffee or lunches, but a lot of ways that you can recognize and reinforce. And my special one is this anecdote on page 39, where he shares that he was talking to an employee about, like, I was telling my wife about this job you were doing the other day. And the guy just like starts crying. And he's like,
no, there's more to it.
Oh, okay. You want to say, well, you tell the story, maybe my notes aren't detailed enough.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say in this section, he is highlighting that there are likely individualized reinforcers for varying employees. And so it would be beneficial for you to learn what those are specifically, because not everyone wants the pizza party or the employee of the month.
Nobody wants the employee of the month.
No one wants that. I
did. I got it once and I was very excited.
He does give it like a nice list. But this anecdote is saying that he worked closely with someone on a big project and he wanted to find a way to, say thank you to them. And he was at the grocery store, I think, and saw a ski magazine. And he knew that this person liked to ski. So he was talking to his wife about it. And she was like, well, why don't you get them the ski magazine just as a token of thanks? And so when he brought it to them, he said, hey, I was talking to my wife about what a good job you'd done. And she said, why don't I give you this ski magazine? Here you go. And so the ski magazine, he didn't really care about because he stopped and said, you told your wife about me? And that was the thing that was really the reinforcer for him, was that he had done a good job and the boss wanted to share that with his wife. Yeah. So that was the takeaway. I loved that anecdote.
That was really good.
So great.
That was a great anecdote.
Yeah.
And it points to, as a manager, your main job is recognizing good work. However, you need to be able to both recognize what good performance is and what bad performance is as well. Because if you can't differentiate when to deliver recognition and when not to deliver recognition, then you're not really going to see improvements in work performance. There's a good quote here from Dick Grote here. Don't treat everyone fairly. So if you're one of those managers who says, I treat everyone alike, you're probably a bad manager. And this is what Dick Grote thinks of you. Quote, the manager who takes pride in treating everybody alike will probably never be caught or confronted. He will simply drift along, content with the mediocre performance that his department or unit or function is producing. Occasionally, he will notice that people who yesterday seemed to be highly committed and motivated now seem to have lost some of their spark and drive. But he will never have to explain to one subordinate why another subordinate is being treated better. So again, you need to know what is important, what needs to be happening, what is good performance, what is solid performance, what is not acceptable performance, so that you can appropriately deliver recognition, frequently enough to maintain and increase those work behaviors, but also not to sort of devalue them, which I think a lot of managers do. A lot of managers are busy and they don't have time to go tell people what a good job they're doing, or they're like, put on schedule, go tell everyone what a good job they're doing. Which, I don't know about you, but has anyone here ever been told what a great job they're doing, and you're thinking about your day and you're like, this is the worst day of work I've ever had. So clearly either this is good enough, and since my life is a mess, this is the best I have to do, or clearly my manager doesn't care what I do, therefore I'll care while I care, and then when other things in my life take precedence, I won't care, and it's not my problem. I don't know about you, but that's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to a lot of listeners too.
Yeah, I don't know if I've had that experience, but I don't know if I had your same mindset afterwards, but I have had your experience where I was having a bad day at work and someone said, you're doing an amazing job. And then I probably started crying, actually. So that's probably what happened in my life. And they're like, why are you crying? I'm like, I'm not crying.
I wish I had the wherewithal to say, how precisely am I doing an amazing job? Could you be more specific?
Be more specific with your feedback.
Yeah. Could you please write it down so that later on, if you ever try to tell me I'm not doing a good job, I can be like, well, the only feedback I ever got was this one that they wrote down, which said I'm amazing. So I guess this punishment I'm getting is stupid.
Like, can you write it down so I can sleep with it tonight?
Yeah.
That's the only thing I got going on.
All right. So we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to keep on keeping on with a discussion of discipline without punishment. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back talking all about Discipline Without Punishment, the book by Dick Grote. But before we continue our discussion, I want to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening, you're able to earn learning credits. In this case, supervision credits. And not just one, but two, because it's a 2-hour book club. Super long discussion. Great. So if you want to get those 2 supervision CEs combined with all the other CEs this month, you can get 4 supervision CEs. All you need to do is finish listening to the rest of the episode, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast player and enter in 2 secret code words, as well as some other information about yourself. I'm going to give you the first one now and the second one later. The first one is fired. 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 The act of being propelled from something, like from a cannon. Or it could also be the act of being discharged from your job. Hopefully, using discipline without punishment, you won't be fired. Sound good?
Or you could be a glazed pot that gets fired in a kiln.
In a kiln. Any of those, fired. And also another reminder, if you are a Patreon supporter at the $10 and up level, don't forget you should be going to your special feed, because in your show notes, you also get a 3rd bonus discount code to get 2 free supervision CEs for being a patron as a thanks for us, because this is a book club and all book clubs come with some free CEs. So some of you are going to get 2, some of you need 3 codes, but everyone gets the same 2 in this episode. And if you want to subscribe, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. All right. Anyway, let's get back to our discussion.
I know I said I don't want to talk about what the book doesn't do, but this is one place in the book where they're just like, give people positive feedback for the things that they should be doing. But they don't go into detail on how do you know what people should be doing? How have you written that down? How have you operationally defined it? How have you shared that with your employees? How have you trained them to do the things that you want them to do? None of that's covered in this book. You're going to need to find that elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so we can move into chapter 3.
Wait, one thing I do want to say, one thing I do appreciate about this book, they do say that you should write everything down. Right?
Yeah.
That's one thing that they do say, that every meeting, even if it's an informal meeting, you should at least document that it happened. And I really appreciate that, because a lot of the times these non-behavior analytic supervision books are like, have a meeting, and if it's not a formal meeting, you don't have to document it. But I love that he says, no, everything should be documented, so that then you can go back and say, like, even if you gave them what they call a positive contact in the book, if you gave them a positive contact, you can go back and say, hey, look, I gave them a positive contact on this week, and look at all the other people that I hadn't done yet. So I like that part.
So chapter 3, Solving People Problem, goes into some of the common issues that you're typically going to be responding to, which you could take it as the flip side of these behaviors that often are problems. How would I define doing a good job in these areas? So you could use that. I think some of the limitation is this is a management book for, as far as Dick Grote knows, who is reading this book. So in terms of what level of training you'd need, is it, he could talk about behavior skills training, for whatever the job is. And that might be a nice addition. But I think there's sort of an assumption that, here are the bare minimums you need to do to have an environment that reinforces work behavior. And the lack of precision sort of is hard to nail down when you doesn't know who's reading the book at any given time. But you could start with some of the chapter 3 areas. So the types of problems that you're really focused on in this book are problems of attendance, problems of performance, and problems of behavior/conduct.
I agree.
Attendance is easy.
I agree. I kept thinking, like, can I think of a behavior that doesn't fall on that? And I couldn't. And I thought about it for like 3 weeks, because I couldn't. When I got to this chapter, it took me 3 weeks to get through chapter 3.
Yeah. I mean, and these are the problems. Either the person is not at work on time every day, or there's something about their work that is not meeting a deadline or goal, or producing a lot of waste, or provoking complaints, or wasting time, which would be performance, or behavior conduct, which he does say is sort of the hardest one to describe in some ways. So certainly there are rules and standards that are set in stone. So safety rules, health rules, those ones are pretty easy. You either are doing them appropriately or you're not.
Either you're smoking in the cafeteria or you're not.
Yeah.
You're not, right?
Things like inappropriate use of company resources, that one can be pretty easy. You're either stealing staplers or you're not, kind of things. But also things like rudeness. Or, he does mention that there are some in behavior conduct that can be harder to define. So it really comes down to, is it impacting their work? And sometimes what you think is a behavior conduct problem is actually your problem, not the employee's problem, unless there is some sort of a measurable detriment that's happening at the job due to whatever those behaviors are. But those are the three categories. And you always need to know which one is which because they're mutually exclusive problems pretty much. And as long as you know what they are.
Are they?
Yeah. But attendance versus performance versus behavior conduct.
If you're not present, then you cannot also have performance issues.
How am I rude to employees when I didn't even bother to show up?
But you could have issues with an employee in all three areas.
Yes, but they would be three different problems. And
right.
As he describes, you might have to have three separate meetings with one employee to talk about three different problems. And there is a period in discipline punishment where you're like, you know what? It doesn't matter if you have a problem in any of these. It's an issue, but that's later on in the chain of events. So once you know these categories, you can look at your own job and say, okay, what are the actions that are supposed to be happening appropriately in these categories? What are the problems that happen here? How do I know for sure when they're happening? How am I measuring them? For each of them, is it a skill or a will problem? I.e., could this be resolved if I held a gun to the person's head? Would they be able to show up on time?
You have all sorts of issues. Don't do that in the workplace.
No, metaphorical gun to their head.
I always call that a motivation issue or a training issue.
Yeah. I like that.
If I said, I'll give you $1 million if you do skill X, could they do it or not? And if the answer is probably not, then it's a training issue. If they could, then it's a motivational issue or a will issue. And then once you know what your problems are, you're able to always identify them and talk to people about the problems, whether it's formally or informally. But either way, you're always going to have to ask yourself, am I, as a manager, dealing with the reason some of these problems occur? So if the problem is in execution of a job, am I removing obstacles from the person so that they can do their job? Am I providing enough feedback to reinforce the behaviors I want to see? And are there appropriate consequences in place to maintain or to increase the amount of this behavior that I would like to see? Again, making contact with your employees. And again, I think Daniels really does this a lot better in bringing out the best in people. Those conversations with employees. Your employees know how they're supposed to do their job or how they want to do their job. If they keep coming up to you saying, there's no way to hit those targets because X, Y, and Z, you as a good manager should be listening to that because it could be an obstacle that needs to be removed. And if you can't remove it, you can't be mad when they don't reach the goal. Again, we've talked a lot about feedback in other episodes. Dick Grote mostly describes it as something that you should do, and it should be accurate, and it should be verbal, and you should have permanent products. Jack, you kind of mentioned that. It doesn't get into too much more than that. And then again, appropriate consequences. Are you reporting on, or are you rewarding, and in this case, it was mostly monetarily and through recognition, your employees for engaging in the behaviors that matter? And he has a great example of a company that said, we need more sales. Our sales are bad. Why aren't our call people doing more sales? And they realized that the system only gave feedback and measured calls per hour, meaning that it was more important that you had lots and lots of calls. But again, to do sales, you probably needed to have longer calls. You might have less calls, more sales.
It's and when they realized, company.
Yeah, they realized they weren't reinforcing what mattered to the company. Of course, employees weren't doing what they needed to do. And when they switched those consequences to be about sales, they saw an increase in sales. So that was a management problem, not an employee problem. And so pretty much in any case, he boils it down to, if you see a problem as the manager, it is your responsibility to clarify the expectations to the employee. What is it they need to do? What is the actual gap you are telling them about what they should be doing versus what they are doing? You should provide training. Can they actually do the job and get the same training as everyone else? 3, arrange appropriate consequences. Does anything happen if the employee does what you're asking them to do? And if not, why not? That's your problem. Provide feedback. Again, are you regularly checking in with the employee to say, hey, I noticed the thing I want you to do. Great job. I bought you a ski magazine. And then number 5, are there obstacles that need to be removed, such as conflicting messages about how you're supposed to do your job? or you're asking people to do more than they can do in less time, or they don't have the equipment or the authority to do some of the jobs or the support to do the job.
If this were me writing the book, I would have added that really up. I wouldn't have made that number 5. I would have made that number 2.
Yeah, that one does feel like a bigger one.
Right? Because if you've clarified the expectations and they're still doing it, then you don't just automatically assume that it's a training issue, right? Because sometimes it's not. Yep. Then you could look about, this is one of the places where I thought maybe obstacles. I would go clarify expectations, look at obstacles, probably concurrently, right? Mm-hmm. And then based on that, like flowcharted it, right? Then we could remove some obstacles, add some reinforcements of a motivation issue, and then provide training. Because one of the things he does say in the book too, that I agreed with, but also didn't see a lot of follow through. And I can't remember what chapter it was in, but he talked about how people just automatically assume that it's a training problem, and then they just start training.
Yeah.
Right? But that's kind of what he's doing if he puts training at number 2. Mm-hmm. Right? And it kind of feels, the book feels very training oriented and not looking at the other pieces. And so I like that he said that, because I do think people are like, training is important, but it's not the only way that you can solve problems. And I think putting that obstacle one on number 5 kind of highlights what people are already doing, is just slapping training on it first. But
yeah, I don't think he meant these to be sequential, or these are more like these are the 5 things as a manager.
But when you put things with numbers, that's how people read them. Right? Like,
in any case, yeah. You either, but as far as, listeners, if you're the manager, you either have done these 5 things, yes, for your employees, in which case the problem is an employee problem, or no to any or all of these, in which case it is a management business problem, in which case there's nothing you're going to, you can't do anything to the employee. You need to do something to fix the problem. It's your problem.
Right.
But the rest of the book assumes that you said yes to all of these, and now the burden of performance is the employees. And that brings us to part 2, performance improvement, which is very similar to discipline without punishment as a whole.
Yep.
I appreciate how well this is laid out, because I think one of the key components of all performance improvement is, like Jackie was saying, lots of documentation and lots of preparation. You're not just calling people in for sort of like fly by the seat of your pants meetings. You are having very specific discussions with them because there is a problem. You are making lots of decisions along the way as to which step to go to next. And a lot of that is based both on the information you have already gathered and what information you get from your employees. So none of this really, outside of maybe sort of the suspension with pay step, it is not meant to be 100% prescriptive. It is meant to be regimented, but it is not prescriptive, because there are plenty of times, even in I'm about to send you home with pay to think about whether this is the right job for you, where you might, as the manager, say there are extenuating circumstances, or they bring up something that I realize I have not been fair about this because somebody else had the same problem and I did XYZ, and I'm sending them home with pay. So that's not consistent. So I'm not going to jump ahead and do that. I got to do something else. So there are lots of points where you might change what you're doing. But for the most part, you sort of have a general set of the steps of what do you do before, during, and after a meeting, whether it's really formal or really informal, and wherever it goes in the sort of chain of events that starts in performance improvement meeting to reminders to termination.
No, to the decision-making leave.
The decision-making leave. Yeah, the suspension with pay is what I just called it. Oh, the decision-making leave is the fancy term. So if you're going to have a performance improvement discussion, the chapter 4 is for you. It tells you this is exactly what you should be doing to get ready for this meeting. And this is going to be a more formal meeting in that it's assumed you're already talking to your employees all the time. You're always reviewing issues. You're always giving feedback. You're doing those kind of on-the-fly trainings if there are small problems. You're working with your employees to solve problems when they're small so that they get solved. So this is for, I've done all the things, all those 5 things, and a situation is not improving. And I feel it needs more formal discussion than just my checking in occasionally with the employee. So what is a performance improvement discussion? Quote, a serious and planned discussion between a manager and an employee about the need to correct a problem and improve performance. It has specific goals and follows a definite structure. Unlike spontaneous, casual discussions about problems, a performance improvement discussion always involves careful planning in advance. End quote.
I like that.
And-
I like this part, right? I think a lot of supervision books also miss that you need to be prepared to the meeting and not just come up, that you need to know. I like the part that he talks about maybe you have a script, right? If this is your first time, maybe you have all the materials ready. It's not just like a jokey, because I feel like sometimes people get into that. I liked that he brought that up, that he's like, we need to be serious in these meetings. We don't need to be stern, but we need to be serious, and we need to be prepared. And I really appreciated this part of that chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about how you as the supervisor have to make sure that the employee understands kind of like where they are in this whole series of things. And if you are trying to have too much small talk at the beginning, or don't clearly state, like, I know that we're not in the reminder stage, right? But like, don't clearly state, like, this is an issue that we need to discuss together. Then they may come away with a totally different perception of what that meeting was and kind of like where they are in this whole, lateral progression. And that will ultimately be to everyone's detriment for not understanding that. So yeah, I liked that layout too.
Yeah. And the format, again, is going to be the same, whether it's a performance improvement discussion or a disciplinary discussion. The format's the same. The documentation is slightly different. So we'll sort of point out where Dick Grote mentions them as being sort of slightly different. But the goal is going to be identify a problem, talk about why it's a problem, discuss the problem with the employee so that the employee acknowledges that it is a problem that they will resolve. And this is on the employee. They are going to resolve it, not you. You make notes about the discussion that happened, and then at some point you do some level of follow-up to make sure that the problem has been corrected. And again, exactly how you document that is going to change based on where you are in sort of the chain of events. And please do remember, for all of these are problems that have at least initially been identified as employee problems. So you can answer yes to those 5 points we already talked about. So this is not the kind of thing you would have if you'd never given anyone training on, say, how to run discrete trials before, and you were going to bring them in and give them a performance improvement discussion about how they're bad at discrete trials. This would not be appropriate because you could not answer yes to the question, have you trained this person in discrete trials? Do you give them feedback? So if you're not consistently checking in with employees and giving them feedback, you really can't use any of these systems, or you shouldn't be using any of these systems because you're not doing your due diligence as a manager and supervisor.
Yeah, because if you skip over that chapter we just talked about and just read this part, then it's like, well, Stanley, you haven't been doing your paperwork. And if you don't do your paperwork, then the next step is a more formal thing. So now you need to tell me that you promised to do your paperwork. And Stanley says yes. And that's the end of the meeting. If you haven't already done those first 5 things, which are super important points, like, did you train Stanley to do the paperwork? Is the proper motivation and reinforcement systems in place to submit the paperwork? Does he understand the importance of the paperwork? And have you provided the appropriate supports for him as an individual in order to ensure that he can actually succeed at this task? If you haven't done all of those, then you have jumped a super important step. And that super important step is the difference between being a unsupportive supervisor and a supportive supervisor. So you have to do those 5 things before you then jump over to this section. I know that's what you just said. I just wanted to say it too.
Thanks for woman-splaining it. All right. So before your meeting, whatever level it's going to be, you need to know what the problem is, and you need to have data as to the actual performance that is occurring and the desired performance too. So if you don't know what it is that they are doing, then it's really hard to have these conversations. And it doesn't need to be intense. I think there's always a sense of, you need to do some sort of long investigation. I don't want to do that unless I really, have to do that. It could be as simple as you have gotten 2 reports from another manager that the person, was brusque with an employee. And that's all you need. And the goal is to not have anyone ever be brusque to a customer, right? And you have 2 reports that they were brusque. That's it. That's all you might need to have at least a more just a performance improvement discussion, right? But it's specific enough. Like, I got 2 reports of this. That's a thing.
I think that's a word you don't hear out loud very much. Brusque.
Yeah. It might be something different, but it could be brusqueness. Who knows? You need to know why it's important. So again, what is it that you are going to tell them? This is why you should change your behavior. Something like brusqueness would be easy. We want our customers to feel like they are appreciated for coming into the store, so they keep shopping here, right? But other ones about like our attitudes, you better be ready to have the conversation, because there's a lot of conversations I've had where people tell me like, we need to do blank. And my first thought is, that's dumb and why? I'm very smart and I know how to do the job. And what you're saying is a waste of everybody's time. So if you can't tell me why, then don't bother bringing me in for a performance improvement discussion. And that's actually a me specific problem. Don't bring me in. I'm a pain in the ass to talk to. I need my data. You're not going to give it to me. It's a bad meeting. And let's see. So again, no assumptions. You are just focusing on what information you have, the specifics. This isn't meant to be an investigation. You're just going to say, and this isn't meant to assume that you know why this is happening. All you know is it is not your fault it's happening because you did those checks. Are any of these 5 reasons happening? Or could they be happening? So it pretty much boils down to, here's what we expect, and here's what happened. This is different than what we want. This needs to change. That's pretty much what the meeting is going to be. But you have to have that information to then have
Very matter
that.
of fact.
Yep.
You're not adding in anything like, well, you just don't seem like you care about this job. None of that. It's just very cut and dried.
Nope.
The facts.
Depending on where you are in sort of the chain of events, whether this is just a starting, like your first performance intervention discussion or reminder 2, you are also going to know what are the consequences if change doesn't happen. You know, what are the contingencies if that poor behavior continues to occur? This part, I wish I had more information. It did feel to me like the goal was not to make it seem like as a manager, I'm in charge and you'll do what I say. It really was meant to lay out realistically, if you continue to yell at customers, and if I keep getting reports that you are yelling at customers won't come to the store. Your floor manager will not give you the time off you ask for. You will not get a bonus at, holiday time. You may be fired. Like, it's really meant to lay out, these are things that could happen rather than to try to shame someone. But I wish I had a little bit more information. I guess it's, again, one of those problems of depending on what your job is, what are the consequences going to be? So really do be thinking about what are some of the things that could happen if the behavior continues that aren't just, and if this continues, you'll be fired. Because no duh. Of course that will happen if you continue to yell at customers. You will eventually be fired. And clearly the fear of being fired is not top of this person's priority list. And if all you've got is you better change or else you're going to get fired. Okay, that's coercive. That's not meant to support an employee doing their best work, nor is it respectful of them. So maybe focus on some of the actual sort of hidden consequences that could happen, and that, socially employees might not want to, be paired with you on shift anymore because no fun working with you, right? There are a lot of other things that could happen. And then you kind of want to know what is going to be the next action step. Is this going to be a meeting that turns into a formal disciplinary discussion that you're going to document? Is this more informal and that you're just having the discussion and you will follow up with them later? And you just need to decide what it is. That can always change when you actually have the meeting. Because when it gets down to it, your meeting will end when the employee agrees, yep, that's a problem. I will change that. That's pretty much how the meeting will end. And if it doesn't end that way, then something went wrong. Probably because you did something wrong. All right. And all that was just the prep. Because when you get to the meeting itself, you will do all of those steps. You will take all the information you've gathered. And this is chapter 5, conducting the performance improvement discussion. And you will implement this. Again, depending on whether this is disciplinary or just an improvement discussion, you will have more or less documentation, but there will be some amount of documentation. You will write up an agenda with all the information you gathered, which is what category is this problem? What are dates that you've talked about this problem before? Because again, the more dates you list there, the more likely this is a disciplinary conversation rather than just a plain old improvement discussion. You will put exactly the performance, the exact performance and the actual performance, the summary of the good business reasons, so you don't have to try to remember it later, that the problem needs to be solved. Pretty much, if the employee says, what does it matter if I do that or not? What is your answer going to be? And the list of likely consequences. All right. Now, the reason you want to write this down, and again, I'm going to list the 5 classic questions from Carol Daughtry here, because this book does sometimes veer into that you have to do this to CYA legally. I don't like talking about that stuff. While I understand it has to happen, I never got into any business or field because I cared a lot about like the legalese of someone being terminated or not terminated. Because like Dick Grote says, if I'm talking about, well, I better make sure I covered my butt so that I can appropriately fire this person, I'm not focusing on being a good manager so much as I am in not getting in trouble. And I don't like spending my life not getting in trouble. I like spending my life doing things that are meaningful to help other people. So there are some things that we might mention that we're not going to spend a lot of time on that go into that area. And these questions are, when you are doing this meeting, Can the employee leave and answer these questions? And can you answer these questions? Did they clearly understand the rule or policy that was violated? Do they understand now in advance that if they continue to engage in the problem, there will be some sort of disciplinary action? Was the rule violated in a reasonable manner compared to what you'd expect to be a safe, efficient, and orderly operation of your business? Is there evidence that the employee actually violated the rule? And is the action follow-up steps planned reasonably related to how serious the offense was, whether this is your first, second, third, et cetera, conversation with the employee, and is it commensurate with other actions that have been taken for other employees? So again, these aren't questions that you're necessarily going to be able to answer in the moment. It's more, if you're using systems like discipline without punishment, you minimize the chance that you can't appropriately answer, yes, this is totally fair for all of these questions, because you now have a consistent body of work pointing to how you respond in similar situations.
So these questions I actually wouldn't have put in this chapter.
No, I didn't like them here, but that's what they were, and they seemed important enough to bring up.
Where I would have recommended them is in the after meeting, right? Like this is about having the meeting, but then you wouldn't ask those questions during the meeting, right? Because you're having the meeting, and you wouldn't stop and be like, So
you may reflect on them, because he does bring up, like, you might change your actions based on things the employee says. You can keep coming back to these questions,
right? But I think in the moment you're not going to remember them unless you have them written down, right? And I think it might be harder to look at them if you're in a disciplinary meeting, right? So I would have put these in the after, and then you reflect on them based on what they say, and then maybe you call them back in if it's not right, if the answers were not right. So that's what I would have done, right? Because like you said, if we are using the system and we are using that body of literature, the answer should be yes to all of those. And that seems more of like did I do what I was supposed to do, and not during the meeting, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? But that's just me.
Yeah. This chapter focuses a lot on the logistics of this meeting, like where should the meeting be held? Probably a private space. Who should be there? When should you have the meeting? Ideally as close to when there's a discovery of a problem. But again, depending on where you are in your steps of this is just an improvement discussion versus this is like a reminder to disciplinary conversation, you may need more time to gather information. So again, the less of a disciplinary conversation this is, the sooner to the initial report you can probably have this meeting. And the more you've gone down the disciplinary steps, the farther away it probably will be, because you just need more time to get information together. How will you sit and be dressed?
You have to consult other people up the ranks to make sure that everyone's in agreement on.
Do union reps need to be there? Or HR rep need to be there? Again, a lot of that's going to be based on your company policies. It's nothing to do with sort of this is what he has some suggestions. The more people, the more ganged up on the person might feel. However, you don't want them to think you're removing any of their rights for representation. And so there's a couple different pieces you have to ask yourself and ask your HR and your union people how that works. But the goal is really for it to be a relatively brief meeting, 10 minutes, 20 max, but really 10 minutes. You should be able to get through everything in the conversation because you did all your work ahead of time. You know exactly what it is you want to say. I appreciate that the goal of the meeting is to get right to the point. And I love the way they start this meeting. I'm going to take this if I ever have to do one of these.
Yes.
And it's just, here's a quote. Joe, I've got a problem and I need your help. That's how the meeting starts. You say the person's name, you get to the point.
But if you said that to every single meeting, right, that you met with Joe, you're like, Joe, I have a problem. I need your help. Yeah. And it's like every other meeting, he's going to be like, you might need to vary the SD a little bit.
I think it's going to depend. Yeah, I mean, is this your first meeting with Joe, your second meeting with Joe? If it's your very first meeting to talk about a problem Joe is having, or it's been a long time, then start this way. But if this is your second or third, this is a reminder 1, reminder 2 meeting, you're not going to start this way off. You're going to be starting, you're like, Joe, I want to follow up on whatever thing we talked about.
Joe, I've got a problem and I need your help again.
Yeah. Some other
examples. I was going to say, they say it's great because you use their name. So you set it up as a personal interaction. You go right ahead and say there is an issue here. So we're not like dancing around and talking about the Red Sox or whatever, right? Which kind of can make people more nervous. You make it an I statement. You say, I have a problem. So you're not automatically blaming them for whatever is about to happen. And you say, I need your help. So we're going to work together to solve this problem. So it's taking it from like a problem solving collaborative approach. I love it.
But it is not. I think the trick, though, this is not, at this point, these conversations are not meant to be collaborative problem solving. This is you telling them there's a problem. They are going to come up with a solution. Collaborative problem solving would be like, hey, Joe, I've been looking at our numbers in blank, and I actually don't know the reason, and I want your feedback so I can come up with a solution. This is, Joe, you ain't showing up on time. Or, Joe, you missed 50% of the work days. I'm not going to tell you how you're going to come to work. And at no point in this conversation will I give you the impression that I'm going to help you come up with a solution. And I think he is very clear about these conversations. This is not a collaborative conversation when you're using them in this context.
No, it is very true. And in the 3rd edition, I would like this to be collaborative. I would like him to say, I've got a problem. Here it is. You're not doing this. Let's work together to figure out a solution, because we don't know if they even know how to solve that problem. And
I'm a little torn. I'm a little torn on that, Jay. I hear you. Part of me does agree that it does feel like it's a little cruel, because some of the discussions later, they're talking about things like attendance, and the person's like, I can't get my kids to, I can't afford, the car repair I need. So it's been hard for me to borrow a car. Like, there are real problems that employees have. And I think it does come down to, at what point are we doing our due diligence as good business people and good human beings to understand how complex lives are? But at some point, we do have to say, I'm not your babysitter. I'm not your parent. I am your employer, and I can't solve all of your problems. And I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think there's a, and this is where it is. Like, I think it's really complicated. When would it be this should be a conversation where we collaborate. And hey, as much as I'm a nice human being, I can't control your life for you, and I can't make the changes that would need to happen in society to make this problem go away. Therefore, it's your problem, and there's no way around it.
It's tricky in that we're like, this whole book is very, very zoomed in on just this one part of the manager-employee dynamic. And this is like a 1% of the time that a supervisor should be spending is in these types of meetings, right? The rest of the time you should be doing all the other things that maybe I want to be more focused on, which is the training, the motivation, the collaboration, the problem solving, the support, right? So that should be 99% of your time, and you should only be doing this 1% of the time. But yeah, I get what you're saying. In these meetings, you've gone past all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So basically, you're going to say, here's a problem. Here's what desired behavior is. Here's what you're doing. This doesn't match. And then you give the employee a chance to speak. Tell me about it. Is there something I should know? And this is one of those points at which the employee might bring up something. And I think, Jackie, this would be a good place potentially where the employee brings up something you were not aware of, even though you did your due diligence, that makes it a management problem. So I think there is room potentially for collaboration there. If they're like, well, one of the problems with being able to get my reports in on time is that, the way our billing software works is we have to go right to the end of the hour with our session, but then I'm expected to drive to the next place. I don't know when there's no time built in for me to write it. So I would have to do all of it at my home on my own time. I have been doing that, but my mom's been sick, so I haven't been able to do. And that does feel like, okay, that's an obstacle. That's on me as the management. I need to look into this more. So that would be a place where you might change. But if it's a matter of, it's tough, it's really been hard to get it done. And, some of the students I've been working with, they've been doing a great job. And the parents love to talk. And I don't want to break our relationship that we have. I think that's been important for why they've been doing the treatment that we've been recommending. So I don't want to cut into that time. So, and that might be a situation where you kind of, do you collaborate? Or is it nope, I understand that. You need to be back at the center to do your paperwork, or you need to get that 10 minutes of paperwork time in every single session. Which one is it? And the book doesn't
I think
exactly
it can be
tell
both.
you when it's either one.
Right. I think it can be
could
both. Right. I think in any conversation, it can be both. Right.
You have to be careful. I think you have to be careful with that, though. And this book doesn't get into because then you could suddenly not be fair. I think that's the other problem is, like, I collaborated with you, but I didn't collaborate with the next person because maybe they weren't as eloquent about how they explained what the problem was. Maybe they had a good reason. Maybe I liked them. Maybe we came up together. There's so many other factors. I think it's really hard to, and you don't want to be so prescriptive.
You don't want to be, culturally biased, right? Against someone who's maybe less used to speaking up in that context, perhaps.
Okay.
So it really comes down to getting their agreement. Tell me about it. So they might tell you something that you need to know, and you go, "Oh, whoops, this is a management problem. This is not an employee problem." But unless they do that, it is an employee problem. And you may not need to give them the why. They may not ask, but you want to be prepared to give them the why. If you think it makes sense, give it ahead of time. If they ask, I'm not quite sure why this is such a problem, you want to be able to answer it. And then the meeting will end with them agreeing to, okay, I will get those papers done at the end of every session, or I will be at work on time every day, whatever it is. It has to be that. It can't be I'll try, or like, I mean, if that's what you want, you know, and this is where I did love the role play. Oh, no, Susan, this is not what I want. This is the job expectation. I need to know that you are going to be able to meet the expectation. Listen here, Sue. Just sit down. No, you're not doing that. But I do appreciate sort of the extra, because I think it is really easy to say, oh, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, of course they'll agree to do it. But if they go, I can't promise I'll try, but I'll try to try, that's not okay. Like, you can't end the meeting unless they say, I will. Yep. Okay. I hear you. And I will solve this. And then we talk about what to do after the meeting in the next chapter. But the chapter actually ends instead with, but what if all these other things happen? And I really loved this section too. But what if the employee does a, yeah, but I can't do the, yeah, but this is a problem. And I love just some of the simple solutions. If an employee does, yeah, but realize that's what's happening, you can't win, and just turn the responsibility back on them. Yeah, that is a real problem. What are you going to do about it? Or what are you going to do to handle that? The silence game, which sounded scary. What if the employee refuses to respond to you? Certainly step one is ask if they're okay, because maybe they're just so like emotional and sad that they're being called in for this. But I really did love, like, has Dick Grote ever had a person come in and like refuse, like just sit there and like cross her arms? I'm not responding. I won't say a word to you, Mr. Grote, about what's going on.
It seems like he has.
I guess so. In that case, it was very much a like, listen, this meeting is over, and you like, and then it started getting into like you have to order them. They have to say something to you, and then it felt like if someone were doing that to me, I'd be like, listen, this meeting's over. Clearly, something else is going on here, and I want more people here because you might attack me, person who refuses to talk. The I'll try game. The response you would give is something, oh, I'll try to do that, or I'll try to be here on time. That's great to hear. But what are you going to do to make sure you're successful? I think that's a really good one, especially around attendance.
Actionable steps.
And then the irrelevancy game, where they start talking about something totally different, where it's like, yeah, well, I think one of the bigger problems at work is, you know, the machines don't ever work on time. Is you agree, you know what? I'd love to talk about that separately first, and then you go back to the agenda of why they're here for the meeting. And as you mentioned, most people who do that don't actually ever want to talk about the thing. When you're like, hey, did you still want to talk about that other thing you brought up? They never want to talk about the other thing. But, you know, you check in. Maybe they do. And so that's the meeting. And in the end of the meeting, they know exactly what it is that is the problem. They know why it's a problem. And they have agreed to do something different. Whether or not this is a performance improvement discussion or a discipline without punishment step, you will respond differently in the next section. And it really just has to do with how much paperwork you're using. Yeah. So go to part 3, the actual discipline part. Chapter 6 on the mechanics of discipline without punishment. It is basically what we just talked about, except you are going to go through more formal steps. So with performance improvement, you could have multiple meetings to talk to the employee. It could be about lots of different problems. You could make it a part of your check-ins with the employee, because at the end, you really just want to make sure they agreed to do something different, and you're just checking, did they do it differently? That's all it is. But if you're having a lot of performance improvement discussions about the same problem without improvements, or if it's a problem that's categorized as a serious problem rather than a minor problem, so like, listen, you really have been lighting a lot of fires near the volatile paint supplies that will blow up the whole building. You don't really get a lot of meetings on that one. Like, you're not going to have a lot of discussions about that one. You might start right in on discipline without punishment, which is going to be... You
drove your bulldozer into the wall. That was one.
Oh, that was one. That one, I think that guy was gone. Yeah. That's a 4-step, but it's a 4-step process. How many of the steps you need to use are going to depend on how intense the problem is going to be. But basically, it boils down to a reminder 1 meeting, a reminder 2 meeting, a decision-making leave, and a discharge. Again, you might have done a bunch of performance improvement discussions, and he is a little wishy-washy as to how many you need to have. It really boils down to what would you consider categories of problems, and then each business probably needs to decide, listen, a problem like this, you're going right to reminder 2 or decision-making leave. A problem like this, you really can do performance improvement discussions, you know, till the cows come home, because it's not that serious a problem. But you and your business have to decide where you go.
And it should be consistent across employees.
Yes. But basically, you're going to do the exact same thing for reminder 1 and 2 that you did in the performance improvement discussion, except since it's a formal disciplinary process at that point, you would need to make sure you do a full investigation of the problem, not just, I got this report and I looked at number. Like, you're going to have gotten a little bit more info. Do you have witnesses of any problem that came up? Do you have other information as to problems that have occurred to this person before that make it a reminder one rather than just another performance improvement discussion? You will probably have a witness. You will probably have some of your bosses or HR people at that meeting. There's probably going to be some sort of different documentation afterwards, depending on where you work.
And you have to make sure you say, this is reminder one.
Yes.
Were you about to say that?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you have to be formal. This is, performance improvement. You just talk about, this is a problem, I need your help. Reminder one, reminder two is to let you know, this is a problem. This is a disciplinary meeting to solve this problem. This is reminder one, reminder two.
So the employees in the organization would know this whole sequence.
Yes,
they would be familiar with reminder one, reminder two, decision-making leave. They should know those terms.
Yeah, we talked about how this isn't a unilateral system. You could do performance improvement discussions unilaterally. Like, if you just say, that sounds awesome, I love that format, I'm going to do that from now on. When I meet with supervisees about problems or my supervised employees about problems, you could probably go ahead and do that. I mean, depending on your company, it's probably not going to be a huge like HR kerfuffle, but you can't do this part, the disciplinary part, unless it is a part of the culture and the disciplinary policy of your company.
Don't go rogue.
If you just suddenly tell someone, listen, this is a reminder too, they're going to say, a reminder of what? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't like this meeting anymore. Now, you are probably you're going to get called into a reminder one meeting if you're not careful as the supervisor. So you're going to have the meeting.
One. Please use reminder one.
Yeah. The only difference is it looks more formal. There might be more people. And then afterwards, you're going to need to document the meeting. And Jackie, you mentioned that you liked that Dick Grote mentioned you should always document. And you could use these documentation systems for any of the discussions. He doesn't really get into exactly documentation until this section. So the performance improvement document, ideally you would do the memo we're going to discuss in a minute. You would do some sort of memo like that just to let the person know, hey, we met about this. You said you agreed to fix this. Really excited to hear that. Really excited to see you fix that problem. And like, you probably send a memo like that.
Yeah.
But you don't have to.
In the majority of our field, we should be documenting meetings that we have with people because we should be supervising our trainees and our RBTs. And so this should be just kind of a regular
and evaluating our supervision, whether it's effective.
Of our system.
What better way to do that than I had 50 reminder one meetings with this person. Your supervision might not be effective. So the book also has a lot of forms in it. So when it comes to documentation, we could talk about them, but it basically boils down to the things we discussed, and you can just copy it right out of the book if your company is thinking of making this change. And then you just make a copy for your department file. But one thing he brings up is everything in the discipline without punishment section has a time limit. So if you're able to correct the problem as an employee, after some period of time, and it varies, we'll talk about the different types. It's sort of up to the business as to how long, but without any more reminder ones or reminder twos or performance improvement discussions, the file goes into a dead file. So it never goes to personnel. So you can't use this against someone after a certain amount of time. So if they make a mistake requiring a reminder one, and then they don't make another mistake requiring a reminder one for 6 months to a year, then they're starting fresh. So there is a real incentive to fix the problem if you're an employee, because there is nothing worse than feeling like, well, what's the point? I'm in trouble and I'm never going to be out of trouble at this place. It does sort of minimize your interest in doing a better job because well, I might as well look for another job. I'm never going to get promoted because they're always going to look at this and say, well, he had a reminder one. So they're not, like, at some point it has to go away. Like, they have to acknowledge people make mistakes and move on. Reminder two, an addition would be share the fact that you had a reminder one meeting and have all that documentation handy. And you also can point out any other issues that have been happening since that reminder one, because you could have a lot of reminder one meetings and because there's 3 different categories of problems. And then afterwards, the same thing. You do your memo. Who was at the meeting? What was the date? What was the problem? What are other conversations you talked about with that problem? If this is sort of like a reminder two type meeting. And then a statement of what's happened since then, that the situation will be corrected, that there's a specific change that they said they would do. And again, what are the consequences if the behavior does not change? Which is mostly going to be, at this point, suspension, decision-making leave.
Don't call it suspension. It's not suspension.
Not suspension.
Don't say that.
Decision-making leave. Now, one thing that I always hate when they put this in management books, but I thought it made sense in here, is the idea of you need to have a meeting, document the meeting with a memo, then have a follow-up meeting to discuss the memo that the person received. I hate that stuff. It's like, how many meetings am I supposed to have about this issue?
A lot.
However, it does feel like, as this is meant to be brief all the way through, that follow-up meeting is really meant to just be like, hey, here's the memo, summarize everything we talked about. Do you have any questions? Get a chance for them to reconfirm, nope, you're not going to see me again in a meeting like this. I'm going to solve this problem. And you say, great. I hope that this is the last we ever, I'm sure, and it's a lot of confidence as the manager. And I'm sure this is the last time we're ever going to talk about it, even though you know there's a whole bunch of other steps that you might need to take. You always end the meeting with, and I'm hoping this is I'm confident this is the last we'll ever talk about this. So you do need to have.
It's interesting. They said, don't bother having people sign.
Yeah, I kind of agreed with that in the sense of, well, you're documenting it. Like the only reason they would sign it, as far as he can tell, is proof that the person actually had the meeting. So I suppose if you were in some sort of like communist bloc country where, some Kafka-esque situation where people are just writing reports about you and putting everything in triplicate and you never saw them, and the fact that you never saw the reports in triplicate is cause enough for you to go to jail, perhaps it would be important that you ask to sign things. But for the most part, I think if someone asked me to sign a document or a memo like that, I personally would feel a bit insulted of like, do you really think I'm going to say, no, they never met with me. No, this never happened. Like, what kind of like gaslighting do you think you can do to your manager? Like, I don't think we ever had a meeting about this stuff. No, none of this ever happened. So really, Grote is sort of like, if you're going to make them sign it, it's pretty much because you think the person is such a liar. Other than that, the meeting happened, you documented it. If you really think they're going to, the reason that if they get to reminder 2 or decision making leave
I will say,
is, no, that never happened. We never had a single conversation. I guess have them sign it.
When I have been in these types of meetings, we've also offered for the employee that they can add their own statement that would go in with the other memo. So that's better than a signature to me, right? And make sure that they get a chance to know something.
He doesn't really bring that up here.
That's not in the book.
I'm assuming it's because you already gave them that opening of what are we going to do about it, and then whatever they said, he does mention you are documenting those things. So if the person brings up plans, like, well, I'm going to have to get up earlier to do that, I'm going to set my alarm earlier, you would write that in the memo of like, you said that you'd be getting up earlier so that you could make sure you made it to work on time every day.
It's assuming that the supervisor is doing everything right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They might not be. I don't know.
They might not be.
There's problems all over the place. What do you want me to? I can't fix it all. Just read what's in the book. So again, those chapters all kind of are the same. You prep, you do the meeting. There's different documentation based on where you are in the chain of events. But what about that decision-making leave?
I like that. I like this. I like this part. I like this part because here, this is putting the onus on the employee, right? It's like, I don't want to fire you. But if you want to leave, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right? I like that part.
Yeah.
But it doesn't replace termination.
No.
Right?
No.
It's just the step before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you may still need to fire someone, but this gives them a chance before that to really think about what it would take for them to keep the job.
And the difference here is you could have a lot of Reminder 1 meetings. He says you could even have multiple Reminder 2 meetings, especially if they were from different problem categories. But the difference with decision-making leave and any of those reminders is once you go on decision-making leave, you decide not only that you're going to fix whatever the original problem is, but you are also going to do all of your work to a satisfactory amount. And if you don't, you will be terminated. So if you've been having problems with attendance, and you've had like a bunch of Reminder 1 meetings and Reminder 2 meetings about attendance, finally you get decision-making leave about attendance, and then you come back to work and you start, smoking in the cafeteria where you're not supposed to smoke, it is very clear that like it doesn't matter that we never
lighting up. That's what he calls it.
We never talked about your lighting up, your vaping in the bathrooms or whatever you do in the modern days. It doesn't matter that we never talked about that. You're still fired. Like you don't get to go on leave and say, well, I only want to leave decision-making leave for my attendance problems. But now I'm being rude to customers. That's a different problem. No, it doesn't matter. Right, once you go on leave, it's like you have whatever time period where you need to get your head down and do your job properly. And once that's over, then we can kind of go back to it's one of these categories and we have these. But at this point, it is like, you're going to be gone. Like, you can't screw up your job. Again, most of the time when people are having trouble with a job, it's usually either they're having a problem in one area of a job or every single area of the job. I don't know that many people who it's like, oh man, there's just two things they can't seem to do right at this job. It's usually there's one thing that is just always a problem, or they are struggling in a lot of aspects of their job.
One thing I do want to say, because we're running short on time, and I want to make sure I mention it, is he also talks to somewhere in here about determining if the issues that you're seeing are because this is just not the right job for the person, and is there another job at your company that they may do better at? Mm-hmm. So is there another type of job entirely that they may have a better skill set that's suited for? Or perhaps have they been potentially kind of promoted beyond their capabilities? And is there a job a little further down the rung that they could go to succeed? So those are also decisions that would be made by the administration, perhaps before you got to the decision-making leave category, but during this whole process.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be thinking about, I got to put this person on this person's going to go on decision-making leave. I wonder if there's another job they'd be more suited for. Hopefully you'd have had that conversation when you asked, tell me about the problem in your first conversation. And they're like, I hate jobs where blank, blank, blank. I do better in an environment where X, Y, Z. And you identify, you know what? The problem is it's not a good fit, but I like this person enough. I like their work enough that I would rather they transfer to that job, and we see how that goes. Maybe they'd still get the reminder one, but maybe they would get transferred over. Decision-making leave, I think you're sort of stuck in the job you're in. Like, don't be having that thought that late. Because again, I think that's a management problem if you're having that conversation then. But basically, it just boils down to, it's the same meeting as you had before, except you need probably more people to approve the leave. You need to be thinking logistically, this person not being at work one day, how is that going to affect everyone else at work too, which I thought was kind to think about. And it's pretty much, other than that, the same as a reminder too, except when you're talking about consequences, there's not really a lot left. You're going to go home. I want you to think about if this is the right job for you, whether you are willing to commit to doing all of the things that need to be done appropriately at the job, and you will come back and meet with me and you will make your final decision. The end. And if you aren't able to live up to the job expectations, you will be terminated. That's it. Like, that's the only consequence you got to worry about at that point. Again, you still, even at this point, can listen. The person might have some reason that this is not the right next step. But for the most part, it will be one of, you are going to decide you want to solve the problem, you will solve the problem, or you don't want to solve the problem and you won't solve the problem. That's it. Those are the two choices the employee gets to make. And here's the quote that goes, that we talked about this a little bit, but we are past the point of asking you just to solve this one problem. If you want to keep your job, what you have to do is make a total commitment to good performance in every part of your job. That's because if another disciplinary problem comes up, this one or any other, I'll recommend that you be discharged, end quote. So this is really you've done all the reminders, you've done everything else. Like, you're going to go home, you're going to think about it, you're going to say, yep, I want to do my good work, I want to stay here, and then you'll come back and do everything and move on. This is not a conversation. You're just talking to the employee. And then usually you end with something like, all right, let me help you. Why don't I walk you out? Because as he brings up, some people are like, nope, I'm good, I'll agree right now. And they don't get to, as the employee, you don't get to agree. No, I agree right now. I'll do the job right. You have to get the day with pay where you're not there.
Yeah.
And again, same thing though, when they get back, if they agree, there's a period of time, probably close to like 18 months, like a year and a half, then 6 months, where this too comes out of their file if they're able to do all their job responsibilities appropriately. Again, same documentation as everything else we've talked about. And then they come back, they know what day they're supposed to come back. And the first thing they do is come meet with you to say, I thought about it. I do want to have this job, and I will, whatever the problem was, I will do all aspects of my job correctly. The end. Hopefully that's the meeting. If they never come back, I was surprised he didn't say, well, if they never come back, you just fire them. I guess it's not that easy to fire someone if they just don't show up again. But realistically, they would come back and you'd have this conversation.
Yeah,
and they would say yes or no.
Job abandonment laws, then they have to miss a certain number of days. And then at that point, you can terminate them.
Yeah. Right.
But again, that goes beyond our supervision conversation.
Just saying.
Chapter 8 is on discharging an employee. Again, Dick Grote reviews.
It does sound nicer than terminate.
Discharging an employee. Discharging an employee is not ever, it's a sign that the system has failed. However, you should not think about it as the employee was bad. You really just think about it as, listen, quote, "You're a good person, we're a good company, but your needs and style and our needs and style are incompatible. So if you do get to the point of discharge, that's what it is. Hey, it's not going to work out. It's not you, it's not me. It's us. We're not working together."
Yeah. I had someone call it's just a bad date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No harm, no foul. I'm sure you'll find something else to do. They talk about all the things you do when you fire someone, in terms of transition plans. Sort of like that movie Up in the Air. Did you guys see that movie with George Clooney, where it was his job?
Nope.
Oh, it was so good. It was when Jason Reitman used to make good movies and not like Ghostbuster remakes.
I'll never watch it.
It was really good. George Clooney plays a guy whose job it is to go to places and fire people. That's his job. And it's all about his attachments and things. But anyway, he goes through, you give a lot of steps when you fire someone. We're not going to talk about those steps. If you're in a position where you fire people, you know what those steps are better than we do. But basically just remembering to be compassionate. It is not about the person is bad. It is about it didn't work out. And they're going to have different emotions and some ideas of what you could do to be a good human being when someone is fired.
It is a good movie.
Yeah. It's a good movie. It's slightly unrelated to that. Well, not really that chapter. All right, coming around the bend, we're on the last couple chapters. These are a little bit more specific to problems you might run into. So what are some extra solutions to problems around attendance and attitude problems? And then also a whole chapter 10 on the administration of the discipline system. And how to make one in your organization in chapter 11. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on 9. We're not really going to talk about 10 and 11 just because, again, unless you are the CEO of a company, how do you create a discipline without punishment system is interesting, but probably not a relevant topic if you're just looking for something to help with your, frontline supervision. But chapter 9, hey, some tips. So, one of the things I really liked in chapter 9 talking about attendance problems is the idea that the cause of attendance problems are irrelevant from a supervision standpoint. Either you are at work on time or you're not at work on time. You should have a policy on attendance. And Dick Grote says you really need to have a focus less on regular attendance as policy, not a policy around excessive absenteeism. Because excessive absenteeism implies to your employees that there is some amount of not showing up or being late that is totally cool. And at some point you'll go beyond that, and then it's a problem. Whereas a policy about regular attendance implies that everyone should come to work every day and be on time. That's not to say that people might not be there on time some days or be late or need to be out for using their sick time or vacation time. But sick time, vacation time really has to do with protections as employees. Their employee protections is that if you're sick, your employer can't say, "I don't care, you're sick, you're fired, get out of here." They legally can't do that. However, even if you are sick repeatedly, you may still be breaking a regular attendance policy. And Grote cites some cases where people were sick and used the sick time allotted, but they used it so regularly or so often that they still were able to be discharged for not excessive absenteeism, for regular attendance problems. So
there are all kinds of rules and regulations.
Yes.
Regarding that.
And he goes into leaves.
People should be able to take medical leave or family leave as needed. And I think, a lot of this book is like, Billy hasn't been coming to work at the widget factory. And that's not just how a lot of life is. So I feel like if they were to do a new version of this book, then that would be a good chance to talk about the more flexible options that we often have available to us now due to technology and also to supervisors' growing understanding of the challenges that come with attempting to, let's say, raise a family and also have a job. And there's definitely leeway in ways in which you can show to your employees that you value them and you value their time. And we can be creative in the ways in which we're flexible in approaching these attendance policies such that perhaps some of these problems could be addressed via a flexible model.
He does bring that up a little bit in this chapter too. And I think this is one, like a third edition, a more modern edition with more understanding around those areas would be really fascinating to get to talk about and hear some different perspectives. For the management literature, really the idea of, especially when talking about attitude problems, that attitude is not something that you can always define It's really your perception as the manager or supervisor of what someone is doing that annoys you. And a big question, and this goes back to some of the big questions you want to be asking as a supervisor, as a manager, of does this matter? And if so, why? And I think especially with things like being at work policies, it does appear that most of our research shows that people are happier when they have flexibility about when they come into work and where they get to work from. There's very little data to support, no, if people aren't constantly in the office that was created at the turn of the 20th century, productivity goes straight to hell. So some of those issues around attendance policies do need to change. And as a good supervisor manager, you need to be asking yourself that why. Does this matter? Is this a problem for me, or is this a problem for the company? And a lot of times, many of the problems I think we always traditionally assumed, well, no, this is a problem for the company, really is a problem for the manager, one person within the company.
Yeah, or asking yourself, is this system in place because that's the way we've always done it? Or is it in place because this truly is the way in which we're going to, help whatever the reason you have a company? Yeah. Is it to help your clients? Is it to help your bottom line? Whatever, right? And I definitely think that the views on that have changed quite a bit in the last, let's say, 10 years. Yeah. And COVID has had a lot to do with that, the response to the pandemic.
Yeah. But we also need to be understanding of, especially in human services, if you have a job where you are expected to be in a place to meet with a client, and the reason you are not able to meet with a client, while one might have sympathy, while it might not be a fireable offense, it also is a huge problem if you are not consistently the place that you said you would be to provide the services that you agreed to give. So while attendance it's one of those sticky wickets of, yes, there are reasons that one might have attendance problems, but I think more than a lot of issues at work, it really is one of, if you're not there, I'm not mad, but also our jobs do count on your being there. And if you can't be there on time and regularly for whatever the reason, it may be irrelevant. And case law might actually be on the side of labor. Not that I want to make it a big labor versus, worker issue here, because when it comes down to it is you need to be looking at your policy. Is your policy about regular attendance, or is it about excessive absenteeism? If it's about excessive absenteeism, you're going to have a hard time resolving attendance problems, because unless they're absent way more than everybody else, it's never going to rise to the point where you even bother using discipline without punishment. But if you have a policy about regular attendance, then you may be able to link it into a system like discipline without punishment in a way that isn't meant to be blaming of the employee. It's just fact. The job requires you to be here at the times you said because we have to provide these important services to a vulnerable population. What are you going to do about your attendance? No harm, no foul. If you're like, well, I have very important family issues that mean I need a more flexible schedule, this might not be the job for you.
Yeah. Or your company could figure out ways in which you could have multiple options available, right? Yep. Like maybe some people want a 3-day work week and some people want a 5-day work week, and some people want to start at 8 a.m. and some people want to start at 10 a.m. Like, do you have the flexibility to offer those and provide choice to people? Yeah. Everybody loves choice.
We definitely are in a place where I think the technology to do remote work is a lot more solid than it was when this edition was written. And therefore means many of the problems that used to be, this is an employee problem, now fall back into that management problem category.
Yeah, you couldn't do remote supervision on your BlackBerry in 2006.
No, not very well. Chapter 10 talks about things like who's in charge of discipline without punishment, who's responsible for documentation, where is it documented, how many reminders can you give? I think really the only thing that's important is if you are using this as a system within a company, the number of reminders really varies based on the level. The earlier levels, like reminder 1, you can give a lot of reminder 1s, whereas the decision-making leave, you really just give one of those. And then it's either the problem resolves or the employee is discharged. And then chapter 11 goes into all the work that would need to go into actually setting up a discipline without punishment system and the logistics. Things like if somebody's already in trouble with the old progressive discipline system, what does this change mean for them? What are the months of appropriate work performance before the files and the reminders get taken out of the files, right? What do managers need to know, even though they may not be trained in supervision while they should be? If they do, how much of this do they need to know? Do they need the whole system, just part of the system? What do employees need to know? What do the big bosses need to know? right? And again, fun to read if you're interested in setting up a big system like this, or you're part of a team doing that. But if you are just looking for ways to add a new tool in your supervision packet, these chapters really aren't going to be for you. And then a whole bunch of appendices with all the paperwork. So if you don't want to make paperwork, congratulations, Xerox the paperwork here. You are full permission of Dick Grote to do so. And then also a section on what data is relevant when you're talking about your discipline without punishment system. And I did like, I like how it was a lot more data related to positive contacts and for how many people are moving between the systems of discipline without punishment, or how many people are reporting high social validity of this system or the change, how many people are getting praise that weren't getting praise before, rather than just fewer people being fired, which is a measure, but probably not the most important measure when it comes to coming up with a good disciplinary system. How hard is the paperwork? Questionnaires like that might be more relevant than how many people got in trouble this month.
And how do people feel about working at your company?
Yeah.
Like, that's where this whole thing started, was, do you feel disgruntled enough to write a swear word on a potato chip?
Yeah.
That goes into...
I mean, I do, but that's my baseline.
Yeah, I was very punk.
I'm a real agent of chaos.
So those types of measures would be very valuable, I would think, to determine have you changed the way people feel about coming to work.
Yeah.
Which is not touched on at all in this book.
He does mention a little bit the idea of morale and some questionnaires about how people like the systems and including them in the systems. But you're right, it is not a huge focus of this book.
No, and he's very... quote, disciplined in his focus, right? Like, he is really just zeroed in on this one aspect. What do you do when you need to provide actual, what is it called? Disciplinary feedback, and what should that system look like in your company? That's all he's focused on here. So if I were to talk to him, right, he would probably be like, oh yeah, of course, you need to spend tons and tons of time on all of these other factors that I have been harping on. So I don't want to say like, oh, he's ignoring these, because I think the book is intended to just like really hone in on this one component that isn't very well represented otherwise. Yeah. A lot of it just has to do with like, you got to know what you need to say before you go into these meetings, and you have to ensure that you're getting your point across quickly and humanely.
Yeah. And respecting your employees as human beings who can make important decisions. And at some point it's your problem and you need to make the fix as a supervisor. But at some point it is the employee's challenge that they have to respond to or not. And if they don't, then they don't. And that's okay. Don't be mad. And if they do, great. Make sure to acknowledge that.
Yeah. And you've done your part in that you've made it really clear to them what the expectation is, the ways in which they are or are not meeting it. You've talked together about how they're going to meet it, and they understand the steps involved in either correcting this or ultimately needing to find somewhere else to work.
Yeah. All right. And that brings us to the end of the book. We're going to do kind of some final thoughts, and then I'm going to read the final line. Unfortunately, Jackie had to leave due to a recording going a little bit long. But, overall, I'll speak a little bit for her. She was happier with this book than she said she thought she was going to be. And I'm glad, because there's nothing worse than telling everyone, hey, let's do this book, and then having everyone hate the book that we choose.
It was voted on.
It was voted on, yes. But I was one of the people who suggested this as a book. So I put it in the poll. It was my choice of, I want to read this. So I put it in the poll and hoped it would win. And that would feel like a double jerk if it also won and then everyone hated the book.
Yeah, my choices never, ever get selected.
I mean, usually people don't want to do anything I want to do. So it's very shocking to me that my book club choices tend to win. But final thoughts. What did you think about this in terms of supervision, in terms of whether you could use it, won't use it as a supervisor?
Again, I feel like I'd probably just said my piece, which is it's good for what it does. And an update probably would be appreciated. Like, he's like coming from the perspective of being an elder statesman, I assume, in this consultation realm. And probably when he comes in, I bet he's a fairly no nonsense, maybe a little bit intimidating type of man. And he's here to say, we got a problem and I need your help fixing it. And everyone kind of falls in line. And, what if you weren't an elderly statesman and we're trying to be the boss? What if you were, I don't know, a woman or a person of color, right? Would that change the dynamic that he's talking about it being just so easy here? I would kind of like some additional perspectives pulled into this book, maybe in a future version. That might be quite helpful. I do think, again, like I said, it's given me things to think about. And if I were in this position or had been in this position more often, I would definitely see the utility in at least having a roadmap to go through these steps.
Yeah. I think for me, where this is going to go into my supervision process really comes into that when you've done all of the work to control and support an environment that is set up to reinforce all of the appropriate, the proactive, the compassionate behaviors of our clinicians, what do you do when it's no longer about, but I've made it an environment that is precise as to what people need to do. I made sure that all the reinforcement is delivered for those behaviors, and yet I still don't always see those behaviors occurring. Like, at what point is it no longer your fault as the supervisor? And at what point is it the responsibility of the employee to some extent, ship up or shape out? And to do it...
I think it's shape up or ship out.
Shape up, whatever. You know what? At some point you're shipping, at some point you're shaping, whichever one you're doing. It's a piece of supervision that I think we try to ignore, because the ideal is, well, if we use enough reinforcement, we'll never have to worry about this problem. And I think a lot of the context that you're bringing up, which is so important, I think, for us to really continue to be exploring, is it's impossible to take a lot of those contexts into account if we only take them into account at certain times, and then at other times we're like, no, but they don't exist at other times. At other times, every human is exactly the same, and every organism will respond exactly the same to my praise and my ski magazines and my employee of the month or whatever it is that you might be using. And at what point is it the good intentions of the manager, whether or not it's good science, versus when is it the employee just having too many other contexts that just aren't going to fit with the job? And can we make that something that is no longer shame of, hey, you have a sick family member? I think a lot of people feel embarrassed that they have a sick family member, and that's why they can't come to work every day. I don't think you would ask anyone, should someone feel embarrassed about that? We'd all say, of course not, no. But how many of us have looked down on that employee that we know isn't coming to work every day? And even though we know the context, how many days are missed before you're like, that person, they're not right for this job? Or I'm mad about this.
Well, they talk about that, right? That your other employees are picking up the slack for someone who's not there. And that's a very legitimate reason to not be there, but it can still cause friction in the workplace.
Yeah, totally. And it's not a matter of, I think, anyone's at fault, but at some point everyone gets tired. If you never, ever, ever miss a day and you come to work and do everything the way you're supposed to be doing it, and you know not everyone else is doing it, at some point you are a sucker. You are being taken advantage of. Now, maybe you have a company that takes note of how many days you've been at work and all the good work you're doing, and that's why you got promoted. That's why you make more money than other people. But a lot of places don't have setups like that. It's just, well, you're expected to do this and it's your job. And you tell that person who comes to work every day, it's your job and you have to do it. But everyone else who's sort of flouncing the rules, who knows what they get told. And I think this does allow for a little bit more consistency that goes beyond just setting up good reinforcement systems and then hoping that always works. And we know that humans are complex and those systems won't always work. And I think it's nice to have another set of steps that also takes into account the respect of our employees and our supervisees, and really tries to create a no harm, no foul sort of pattern, or a pattern of steps that one can take. It's not perfect, nor is it without punishment. However, it is the most I've ever heard anyone talk about what do you do in those situations. So at the end of the day, you win Dick Grote just by having something. And I don't dislike it. But I mean, at the end of the day, there's things I would like to change about this, or I think he might even change with an updated version. But right now, this is the only person I've ever heard talk about these situations in as clear and consistent a manner that is in line with sort of how I want to be a supervisor that I've ever read. So is it what we've got right now? Perhaps. And then finally, the last line. Every book should have a good last line, whether you're nonfiction or fiction. Dick Grote, your last line is, it's fine. It's okay. Here it is. It's two sentences. Quote, "The final test of the effectiveness and success of discipline without punishment is when it stops being a program, a project, a policy. Discipline without punishment is finally and fully implemented when it has become so incorporated into the grain of organizational life that everyone considers it just the way we do business here." That's nice. Okay, great. Not the greatest last line ever, but it's better than some. And with that, we come to the end of our Discipline Without Punishment book club. Thank you all so very much for listening. We hope you have enjoyed Supervision September. Don't forget, you need a second secret code word if you want to get 2 Supervision CEs for this episode. I'm going to give it to you now. It's CLAMS, CLAMS. Whether it is the mollusk that you can eat, or whether it's slang for all the clams you're making at your job at the widget factory. Either way, CLAMS. All right. Well, a good Supervision September was had by all. And I know our patrons have an even better Supervision September, because being a patron at the $10 and up level at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track gets you access to a third discount code word that'll give you 100% off on getting CEs for this episode. And not just this episode, but for every book club and seasonal listener's choice episode we do. If you're wondering why we picked Discipline Without Punishment, Dinah mentioned voting. Guess what? Only patrons get to vote. We did a summer beginning of the summer voting, so we know our next book clubs for the whole year. We're very excited to be talking about other books like Discipline Without Punishment, Science of Consequences, or the Science of Consequences, Divergent Minds, and then a fourth one that I can't remember the name of right now.
TBD.
Well, it's not TBD. It's on the list. I just don't have it in front of me right now. But all of those book clubs will be coming out every season. CEs are for our patrons at $10 up. No additional charge, as well as getting to vote in next year's poll when that comes up. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Some final thanks. Certainly thanks to Jackie and Diana for being here. Thanks to you for listening. Thanks again to our patrons. Thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for his interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with a non-supervision episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.